Let's take a look at South Asia since 1945. Of course, we'll focus in on the subcontinent of India and many things that take place there since World War II. The British Raj, or rule of India, was in place, and this is going to come to an end. World War I had weakened it somewhat, and then World War II, of course, the British had many other things they had to worry about. And in the midst of that, they began to move back from many of their colonies, including the one that had been called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, India. So in 1947, the British end their rule in India. And as it's positioning up to that, as it becomes clear that's going to happen, many people that lived in India wanted independence. They saw the British as the problem. When the British were leaving, now, well, old allies now become enemies. So this is a principle of history. My enemy's enemy is my friend. If we can agree we don't want Britain to rule India, then we can overlook our differences and focus on that. Once it becomes clear that India is actually going to be free of the British, the next big question then comes is what will happen to India once it is freed? Because there are several religious groups within India. Two main ones, of course, are Hindus and Muslims. And they had not been getting along prior to this, and certainly when independence comes, this is going to emphasize this. And so the push then will come by some. Gandhi, of course, wanted to try to keep India unified. He felt if India started to be divided, he said it would end in a bloodbath and a lot of people dying. I guess in that he was right, because it will not end up unified. It will be divided into two countries, which later become three countries. So let's talk about that. Of course, there were predominant areas that were Muslim and predominant areas that were predominantly Hindu. So those that were mostly Muslim will end up forming Pakistan. You can see in this map, these areas in green are Pakistan, and this is where you have the majority of Muslims that are there. You'll notice there's also this sort of yellowish orange color here, tan and orange. These colors are the areas that were predominantly Hindu. Then you'll notice that there are a few areas here that are gray. They are this way because those aren't neatly going to fit into either category. For example, Hyderabad here in the center of India is majority Hindu, but ruled by a Muslim prince. So that's going to cause problems. Likewise, up in this corner up here, you have Kashmir, which is mostly Muslim, but will eventually be controlled by India. So these are just some of the problems that begin with a divided India. So once it becomes clear that it will be divided, riots begin to break out. Who's going to be in control? Which territory? Which country will get this territory? Eventually, India had several princes that ruled regions or states within India. They are told that they must choose which country they're going to be a part of. They're going to be a part of India, which is going to be technically a secular state, but predominantly Hindus, or is it going to be in the Muslim state? Officially on August 15, 1947, two states formed: Pakistan and India. And Pakistan, of course, is the Muslim areas that you see up in the northwest, and there's also a section over here in the northeast. These come to be called East and West Pakistan. East and West Pakistan. Once this is announced, then there are millions. There's at least 14 million people that begin to move, to flee from one area to the other. For example, up here in Punjab, you have Muslims that are fleeing into Punjab. You have Hindus that are fleeing out of Punjab, and so forth. So a lot of people trying to move. Most of these people are moving on foot. They don't have vehicles. They don't have trains or anything. And it's estimated at least 1 million of these people die. At least 1 million. Well, during the midst of this movement and so forth, Gandhi makes it clear that he is not in favor of a divided India, and this doesn't make him any friends opposing the division, because there are those on both sides who really desire to have this division. In 1948, the end of January 1948, Gandhi is assassinated not by a Muslim, but by a Hindu. A radical Hindu who evidently doesn't like the idea that Gandhi is trying to keep the Muslims within India. If you sometime, I guess since you might have a little time on your hands here coming up pretty soon, a movie that you might want to watch is just called Gandhi. It's been out for a long time now, 1982. But I think it's a good overview of this period in the life of Gandhi. And so I would recommend it to you as something perhaps to watch to give you better insights into this period. As I mentioned before, Hyderabad is the area that, you remember that gray area in the center of India, that is Hindu majority but under a Muslim viceroy. And he refused to join India. Kashmir has a Muslim majority, but it's under a Hindu prince. And of course, he refuses to join Pakistan. And so this leads to conflict. For example, in 1948, Indian troops invade Hyderabad and forcibly annex it, and the prince says, okay, we're going to join India, and he remains the prince until the end of his life. But this becomes then a part of India. India was also able to seize most of Kashmir, but Kashmir is a real problem point today for India and for Pakistan, because there's conflict there. It's in the mountains, the Himalayas. It's very rugged territory, but also one that's very contentious. Now, we saw Gandhi, now Nehru. Let's talk about Nehru. Nehru becomes the leader of the independent India. And he had been pushing for this idea of having a divided India, a Muslim state, and a Hindu state, basically, or a secular state that's primarily Hindus. So Nehru then is going to become the main leader of this time. He, like Gandhi, they were both trained by the British, knew the British model. Gandhi, of course, becomes more separate of British ideas, but Nehru adopted the British model. He didn't want to get rid of everything. And so we see that India ends up with a parliament, much like Great Britain has a parliament, and that he is the president. sort of like the prime minister, I guess, of Great Britain. And of course, they form a political party called the Congress Party. This Congress Party is the dominant party for, well, for most of the history of the independent India. And of course, if you remember when we talked about Great Britain right after World War II, with the changes that took place in Great Britain, it brought in a lot of socialism, socialized medicine, and things like that. This is going to be the kind of model, the model of Attlee, the British Prime Minister, will greatly influence Nehru. So the industries will be state owned, the resources will be owned by the state, transportation and utilities owned by the state as well. Retail businesses and local sort of businesses are to remain private. Farms are allowed to remain private, but co-ops between farmers are encouraged. Nehru followed Western materialism approach, and he pushes industrialization. He wants India to become industrialized and be able to more compete or be in the mold of the Western powers like Great Britain. When it comes to the Cold War, he is neutral. He wants to stay neutral on that. That makes it tough because during the Cold War, as we've talked about earlier, pretty much everybody has to choose sides if they're going to be on the side of the U.S. or on the side of the USSR. And Nehru tries to remain neutral on this, which of course does not make the United States very happy about that. Of course, he is definitely against having colonial power. He's anti-colonial but neutral on the Cold War. Now, speaking of war, I told you that area of Kashmir would be a problem, and it is a problem. In 1965, Nehru's government, Nehru will die in 1964, but India will go to war over Kashmir in 1965. And they maintain their control over it, but it's still a problem point politically, even still today. Now, another development that takes place, remember we said Pakistan is divided east and west. The eastern part of Pakistan believes, and probably it's true, that many of the interests of East Pakistan are not being considered enough by West Pakistan. In other words, most of the government is over in the western part of Pakistan. And East Pakistan, you have to remember, is like 2,000 miles away. It's a long ways away. And so they feel as though the resources, the money, the attention, they're just not getting it. And when a general is assigned to be the governor over in East Pakistan, a governor from West Pakistan, this was going to lead to riots in 1971. And India is in fact going to help the people in East Pakistan, take their refugees, even send troops and so forth, to help them gain their independence. And this is when East Pakistan will separate from West Pakistan and form Bangladesh. Okay, we'll talk more about that later, but that's something that happens in 1971. Now, after Nero's death, not Nero, Nero's death in 1964, of course, he'd been the one who had been guiding this even before they had independence. And so he was a major figure of forming the independent state of India. when Nero dies, they do have a successor there who was only in for about a year and a half, and then they turn everything over to his daughter. She becomes the next major figure. She's pictured here. Indira Gandhi, prime minister at two different times, 66 to 77 and 80 to 84. Now, she's no relation to Mahatma Gandhi. She gets married to a man whose last name is Gandhi, and so that's how she gets the name Gandhi. But her husband is not related to Mahatma Gandhi. But I know a lot of times that confuses people. But at any rate, she is the daughter of Nehru, and she is going to sort of follow in her father's footsteps, continuing his policies. She was more aggressively going to help the poor. But of course, she was, I think a lot of the people who encouraged her or pushed her to become the prime minister, I think maybe they felt they could control her, but they found out differently. She nationalized the banks and then started to give out loans that were easy to obtain. This is to help the poor and so forth. She had low-cost housing. She made it so that landless people could get land to farm. She also had a policy of forced sterilization. This was a very controversial policy that she had, that women would be sterilized at a certain point so they wouldn't have any more children, because the population was exploding in India, and by the way, it still is in large measure. But this unpopular position, and of course then she is, some people claim, corrupt, had some corruption. This is what led to her defeat in 1977, 11 years after she comes to power. However, she is reelected 3 years later in 1980, and will continue on after that as prime minister. Now, Punjab was one of the areas in the north that I pointed out on that map. I'll let you go back and take a look at that. Punjab's in the north area near Pakistan. There's another religious group called Sikhs. Sikhs had been used by the British as bodyguards and military for many years because they were neither Hindu nor Muslim, and so the British felt that they could trust them more to be bodyguards of militia army. And so that had been a long-time role of the Sikhs. Well, Indira Gandhi had Sikh bodyguards, and that was fairly common. In fact, she had some of the same bodyguards as her father had, and she trusted them. But when there was a Sikh rebellion in the Punjab, she put this down with force, harshly, and several Sikhs died. One of their religious shrines was damaged, and it created a huge amount of controversy. Her advisors told her, you should get rid of these Sikh bodyguards, you should replace them with somebody else. But basically she trusted them, and she had them for many years. However, it was her Sikh bodyguards who assassinated her in 1984 at her residence, and shot her. Well, first one of them shot her once, and then the other one shot her about 30 times. So, of course, those guys were caught, and they were sentenced to death. But nonetheless, she's gone, and it's this area of Punjab that ended up being the place that created the turmoil that, of course, led to her demise. Well, of course, after her assassination, many Hindus turned on the Sikh population, and there were anti-Sikh riots, and many Sikhs were killed in India. So this is was a dark time. Well, who will take power then? The Congress Party had convinced Rajiv Gandhi, who is the son of Indira Gandhi. His brother had been the one who was groomed to be the leader, to be the next leader. And he was not really interested in politics. He was a commercial pilot. He was living a kind of jet set lifestyle. You know, he could fly around, making money that way, and he didn't have to worry about all the politics. But when his brother died, his brother was also a pilot, but he was a fighter pilot and had an accident and was killed. Then the pressure came on him to step up what his brother was going to be asked to do by his mother. And so he got into politics that way. And then after she was assassinated, others encouraged him, convinced him that he should be the next prime minister. And so he does. He becomes prime minister. As you see, he's prime minister from 1984 to 1989. He's going to allow more private enterprise than his mother. And he will also be charged with corruption in his government. But the thing that really becomes a pivotal thing in his life is there is a dispute on the island of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka had earlier been called Ceylon. It's the island, the rather good-sized island at the south, near the south end of India. If you look on a map, you'll see it. Sri Lanka, the primary population there were Buddhists, but there was a minority of people there who are Hindu, and these Hindus are related to other Hindus in India. And so some of them began a movement of independence. They wanted to have an independent state on Sri Lanka, sort of divide the island up, kind of like India had divided between Muslims and Hindus. They wanted to divide it up that way, maybe gain the whole island. But at any rate, they are rebels. And Rajiv Gandhi is called upon by Sri Lanka government to intervene because the people doing this are Hindus and they have relatives back in India. And, the relationship between the island of Sri Lanka and India goes back many, many years. So he does get involved. And in fact, at one point, he actually sends peacekeeping forces to help the government maintain peace with these rebels. This makes these rebels very, very angry, to say the least. And he becomes prime minister 84 to 89. Then some of the calls of corruption and other things, he is voted out of office, but he comes back campaigning to be reelected. And this is in 1991. He's down in the southern part of India, where there are relatives there who are related to the people at Sri Lanka. And in fact, he is assassinated by a woman named Thenmozi Rajaratham. She approaches him in a crowd. There are some photographs of it. Of course, he's greeting many people. She greets him. And then she bends over to actually kiss his feet. And while she bends over, she actually has an explosive belt on. And she detonates it and blows him up, blows herself up. I think about 35 people are killed and about 150 people are injured. So this is the end of Rajiv Gandhi. Now, the Congress Party at this point which had basically controlled India this whole time, begins to fade in power. Its control over it is faded. And a new party called the BJP, the Bharatiya Janata Party, we'll just call it BJP, which is what most people do. This party is sort of pro-Hindu, pro-India, nationalistic, I guess you might say, party. And it has been gaining strength in India. This, of course, has created more tensions between Hindus and Muslims because, not all the Muslims are out of India. And so there are Muslims and other minorities in India. And so those who aren't Hindus find this somewhat a threatening trend. So here we can see, for example, A.B. Vapagi becomes the prime minister, and he's from the BJP party, 1996, 1998 to 2004. Congress Party comes back into power, but and the current prime minister, who was elected in 2014, is the man pictured here. This is Narendra Modi, and he was elected prime minister in 2014. And I believe he was re-elected, in I think 2018, something like that. So anyway, he's the current prime minister. Will be prime minister for a few more years at least. But he is, controversial character. He favors privatization and pro-Hindu positions. But I guess I'd say he's flamboyant, right? He's very much concerned about the way he dresses and his appearance. He comes from a background where he grew up very poor, and in fact, his father sold tea. He had like a little pot of tea. He would go around and sell tea. That's how his father made money. He would sell tea as well, have a little shop and sell tea, him and his brother. And he's come up from this rather humble background, and of course he's become prime minister. So now he dresses in a very elaborate way, often. And one thing that got the most attention is a few years ago when Barack Obama visited India. Modi got this new suit that he wore, a blue pinstripe suit. Okay. But one of the things that really caught people's attention is that the pinstripes on it actually have his name. I don't know if you can see that there, but it has his name. See, Narendra, right? And then it has his middle name, Damodaras, and then Modi, and it just repeats over and over. All of the pinstripes are that, and a very wealthy guy from India bought this suit at an auction for what is more than $500,000. $500,000. What he ended up paying was more than $500,000 US for this one suit. So this has actually made the Guinness Book of World Records for the most expensive suit ever sold, something like that. So he has many critics and who don't like his sort of personality or his approach. But he's somebody who is currently in power. President Trump visited there just a couple of months ago and met with Modi and kind of went around and did rallies there with him. Pakistan and Bangladesh. This is our last screen of this presentation. Well, let's just say a couple things about what happens in Pakistan and Bangladesh. August 1947, of course, the new country starts. Now, India, of course, had been around as a entity, a country, but Pakistan really is something new, something different, right? And And it's based primarily, the reason it comes into formation is religion. Now, the other thing to remember is, as we've mentioned, West Pakistan and East Pakistan, these were the predominantly Muslim areas. So when this forms in 1947, you have this rather difficult situation where you have these two parts of the country of Pakistan divided by, I think, more than 2,000 miles. West Pakistan much larger than East Pakistan. However, East Pakistan is pretty productive area. West Pakistan has a lot of mountains there. So at any rate, West Pakistan had more diversity. It had to deal with, notice that East Pakistan is pretty much just surrounded by India. But West Pakistan, of course, has to deal with Afghanistan up in this area, and has Pashtuns, which are tribal links to Afghanistan. It has Baluchi, who on the border with Iran over in this area, and the Punjabis, which is they're up in here and on the border with between India and Pakistan. So there's a lot of things going on over in the western part. And of course, that's where the capital is, and that's where most of the decisions are made. Also in the western part, there's a tense start over language, religion, and regional issues. These are all things that Pakistan had to deal with. So what's going to happen then, the idea is, well, let's have a kind of democracy. That's what one group pushed for. But the other said, no, we should have Islamic laws. So what ends up happening is that Pakistan, East and West, is not sort of a true democracy. It's more an Islamic state with Islamic law. Now, East Pakistan felt as though they were being neglected, that the West was not really dealing with their unique situation, that they were keeping most of the resources, that they weren't really addressing it. At any rate, as we mentioned before, in 1971, East Pakistan rebels. And of course, since it's so far away with India in the middle, it makes it difficult for West Pakistan to deal with this. And in fact, India comes to the aid of East Pakistan. So East Pakistan separates and becomes Bangladesh. So it's now, since 1971, two separate countries. But Pakistan has many problems that it faces. Of course, you know about the long war in Afghanistan, which the United States has been involved with now for, well, since 9/11, for about 20 years, and we're trying to pull out of Afghanistan, but of course it's proving to be problematic. And of course that has affected Pakistan. Also, there's a lot of poverty, illiteracy. There are more radical Islamic groups that come into Pakistan. And of course you have the problem with Kashmir as well. That gives them problems with India. So this is just a bit of an overview of South Asia, primarily India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh.